Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a tradition that's home to a billion followers and, yeah, thousands of gods. But at its very heart, there's a belief in one single ultimate reality. It's a spiritual path so ancient and so diverse that, honestly, just trying to define it is part of the journey. So, what exactly is Hinduism? Let's get into it.
To try and get our heads around this ancient faith, let's actually start with a pretty modern story. Back in 1987, something incredible happened in India. Every single Sunday morning, right at 9:30, the whole country just stopped. I mean, from the biggest cities to the tiniest villages, everything came to a standstill. Why? Because an estimated 80 million people were all doing the exact same thing. They were glued to their TVs.
So what were they watching? They were watching the Ramayana, an ancient, epic story brought to life on screen. And this was way more than just a TV show. It was a national event. People would literally treat the actors playing the gods like they were the gods, even touching their feet for a blessing. It was just this powerful reminder that these stories aren't some dusty relics. They are a living, breathing part of the world today.
The fact that this show was so popular really highlights how vibrant this tradition is. But it also brings us right to a huge fundamental question, one that people have been debating for centuries. What exactly is Hinduism? Well, right off the bat, there's no easy answer. You see, the insider or devotee perspective often calls it Sanatana Dharma, the eternal tradition. The idea here is that its core truths are divine, that they were revealed to ancient sages and exist completely outside of human history. Now, on the other hand, you have a long-standing scholarly idea, and it's definitely a subject of a lot of debate, called the Aryan migration theory. This suggests that around 1500 BCE, a group of people migrated into India, and their beliefs and rituals then blended with the local cultures to form the roots of what we now call Hinduism.
And this difference in perspective is actually baked right into how the scriptures are understood. Hindu texts are basically split into two big categories. First, you've got Shruti, which means that which is revealed. Think of these as eternal divine truths, like the ancient texts called the Vedas. And then you have Smriti, or that which is remembered. These texts, like the Ramayana we were just talking about, are seen as being written by human sages who were inspired by those divine truths, and they wrote them down to make those big ideas accessible to everyone.
Okay, so moving from its history to its philosophical heart, Hinduism asks one of the biggest questions there is: who am I? It's all about the search for the true nature of the self.
There's this beautiful story from these ancient texts, the Upanishads, that explains this with a really simple analogy. A father tells his son to take a chunk of salt and dissolve it in a bowl of water. The next day, of course, the salt is gone. It's invisible. But the father tells him, taste the water. And when the son tastes it from the top, or the middle, or the bottom, it's all salty. The essence of the salt is everywhere, even though you can't see the salt itself. And then the father delivers the punchline. He says to his son, Tat Tvam Asi, which means that you are. What he's saying is that the invisible, universal essence that makes up everything, the saltiness of the universe, you could say, is the very same thing that makes up you. Your individual self isn't separate from the ultimate reality. It's identical to it.
Now, what's so fascinating is how this one powerful idea, that you are, has been debated and interpreted for centuries. A philosopher named Shankara argued for non-dualism. Basically, your individual self, or Atman, and the ultimate reality, Brahman, are one and the same, period. But then Ramanuja came along and said, well, it's a qualified non-dualism. We're distinct from God, but we're also inseparable. Kind of like how a body is to a soul. And then Madhva argued for straight-up dualism. God, the self, and the world are all totally separate. And these aren't just academic debates, you know. They fundamentally shape how millions of people connect with the divine.
And underneath this whole spiritual journey are two massive concepts. Samsara is the idea of a continuous cycle of life, death, and rebirth. So what's the engine that powers this cycle? That would be karma. It's this universal law of cause and effect, where every single action, every thought, has a consequence that shapes the circumstances of your next life. For many, the ultimate goal is to finally break free from this cycle altogether. So we've touched on the really deep inner philosophy. But how does that actually express itself in the outer world of worship, with all of its vibrant temples and, yes, its countless deities? You know, an ancient story from the Upanishads just perfectly nails the Hindu understanding of God. A seeker goes up to a wise sage and asks a very simple, very direct question. How many gods are there? The sage's first answer, 3,003. Maybe he was just testing the seeker.
But the seeker persists, asking for the real number. The sage just smiles and brings the number down to 33. Still not satisfied, the seeker asks again, and the number drops to 6, then 3, then 2. Until finally, the sage reveals the ultimate truth. There is only one. And that little dialogue just brilliantly illustrates a core idea. Hinduism can look polytheistic, right? There's this huge pantheon of gods and goddesses. But at its core, it's also deeply monotheistic. All those many gods are seen as different forms, different expressions of one single ultimate divine reality. A perfect example of this is the whole concept of avatars. You take a supreme god like Vishnu, for example. The belief is that he descends to Earth in various forms whenever the world is in chaos. These avatars include a fish, a tortoise, and, of course, the most famous ones like Rama, the hero of the Ramayana, and the beloved god Krishna. They are all just different faces of the one divine being, here to restore cosmic balance. So how did this ancient and incredibly adaptable tradition handle the modern world? Well, it didn't grow up in a bubble. Its encounter with colonialism and modernity had a profound impact on it, and in turn, it helped shape the world we live in today. When the British arrived in India, they tended to look at Hindu practices through their own Christian framework, and they often dismissed what they called idol worship as something primitive. This criticism from the outside actually sparked a really dynamic response from the inside. Hindu reformers, like a man named Ram Mohan Roy, started to re-examine their own traditions. They pushed for social change and argued for a rational, monotheistic Hinduism that they believed was the religion's true original core. This whole period was just one of massive transformation. It starts with colonial rule, which then gives rise to these powerful internal reform movements. And then at the end of the 19th century, you have this absolutely pivotal moment. Swami Vivekananda speaks at the World's Parliament of Religions in Chicago. He presented Hindu philosophy to the West with such confidence and clarity, and it really marked the beginning of Hinduism's journey as a global religion. Which, of course, brings us all the way back to where we started. After this whirlwind tour through millennia of history, philosophy, and devotion, we have to ask that question again. Is Hinduism a single, unified religion? Given everything we've seen, the conflicting philosophies, the thousands of gods who are somehow also one, the incredible diversity of scriptures and practices, maybe religion just isn't the right word. Maybe it's better to think of it as a vast, interconnected family of traditions. They all share a common ancestry, sure, but each one has its own unique personality. And this, really, might be the most crucial takeaway. Maybe the most important thing to understand about Hinduism isn't some neat and tidy definition. Maybe its true lesson is that its immense, sometimes contradictory diversity actually challenges our very idea of what a religion is supposed to be. And that is a question that's worth thinking about.